At the Yellen Center for Mind, Brain, and Education, Dr. Paul Yellen and his team aim to develop students' understanding of their learning strengths and challenges.
A critical component of understanding a child's learning profile is now using it, and using it to develop a plan, so that when people leave our clinic, they're leaving with a comprehensive plan, but they're understanding what they're working on, what strategies are they using to strengthen their strengths. If I'm a tennis player and I have a strong forehand, I'm going to strengthen my forehand, and I need to know what I'm going to do to strengthen my forehand. If I have a weak backhand and I'm playing somebody who's going to take advantage of that, I have to use my forehand to my advantage to overcome where my weakness is, but I also want to work on making my backhand stronger. And I think that one of the things that gets confusing to families is that they kind of say, well, if you give somebody something to help them work around an area of weakness, isn't that giving them a crutch? And I think it becomes critical to understand what you're working on and have a game plan. For instance, quite commonly, kids will have difficulty coordinating their finger movements. It's called a graphomotor dysfunction. Some people call it dysgraphia, but they're having difficulty. As a child once said to me, I said, so why's writing so hard for you? He goes, well, you know, it's kind of like my printer don't work. And I said, your hands don't sort of do what you want them to do? He goes, not at all. He goes, you know, you sometimes get that message from your computer that the CPU is not communicating with the printer. Well, that's me. So that the idea is, and a lot of parents and teachers will be very uneasy about allowing a child to use voice dictation or to use a keyboard. And what we think is really important is that, as UDL helps us understand, is that you want to be specific about what you're working on and what the goal of the task is. So if the goal of a task is to build your expressive language skills, and moving the pencil is consuming, and by the way, it's not just me, but all of us have limited brain resources. And so if we're using a disproportionate amount of our resources doing something that should be automatic, like forming letters, then there's less to work on the thing you need to work on. And so when a child understands that their handwriting is the problem, then they need a bypass strategy. They need to be working on strengthening their vocabulary and strengthening their expressive language skills and strengthening their ability to create a coherent narrative. Because if we don't give them a bypass strategy, then they're going to tend to write less and not develop their higher thinking skills. So that you want to strengthen that area of strength and give them a strategy that we call a bypass strategy. People might call it a crutch, but I would say it's not a bypass strategy. It's a bypass strategy. It's only a crutch, and it's only a problem if that's the only thing you do. Well, first of all, you say that you want to work on somebody's handwriting. Well, the best way to work on somebody's handwriting is like when you go to the gym and you isolate the weak muscle and work on it, so that if the child is having graphomotor problems, what he needs to do is work on forming his letters as a task that's just focusing on letter formation, so that they're not caught up in trying to form content. So it's critical for a child to understand what they're working on while they're working on it. I had a child who was in a pretty tough inner city school. He was in elementary school and he had this difficulty, and he was allowed to use a laptop. And when they leave our clinic, they come out with a sort of a spreadsheet that says, these are my strengths, these are my challenges, I know what they are. And he was, they were making fun of him because he was using a laptop. So he said, come here, and he sat down and took out this paper. He says, Dr. Paul says I'm smart, that's what that means. And I know a lot of words, that's what that means. And I have a good memory, that's what that means. But I have trouble making my letters, that's what that means. It's called graphomotor dysfunction. That's why I need a laptop. Okay? And they go, okay. So that he knew what he was working on, and what that allows him to do, or kids to do, is to sort of put boundaries around it. That is, when you have dysgraphia, you put a label on somebody, and labels in and of themselves are not bad when we're using them to label what's wrong with somebody. They're bad when you label somebody by what's wrong with them. And so that when we define somebody's learning needs by their dysfunction, as opposed to acknowledging we all have dysfunctional parts, and that understanding what that is and being specific about it allows a child to put boundaries around it and work on it. But also recognize, just like the tennis player that's got the strong forehand, that I have these other things. And so I can I can live with these things because I know that that's not all I am. I can live with these things because I know that I have all of these strengths. And also I know what this is called, so I know what I'm working on. So he knows now he's going to occupational therapy to work on this graphomotor problem, which he knows he has. And he's not going there because he's bad or he's done anything wrong, but he's got a specific purpose, and he's understanding it. And you know, we'll have a lot of parents who will say, well, my kid he's not going to understand these things. And I say to every kid that, you know, you have a right to understand what this stuff is called, and you'd be surprised how kids love to know what it's called, and it, you know, it makes it understandable for them.